Okay, I want to thank Linda for putting this together. It's an enormous amount of work. And she's going to manage the whole thing, and she's braver than I am. And I want to thank all of you who are tuning into this instead of watching the Olympics, because I think Shaun White, the snowboarder, was competing today. All right, so as Linda said, I'm going to talk about post-harvest handling. So you have your beautiful garden or farm produce, and you want to know what to do with it. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to talk about canning or freezing, because I don't do that stuff, especially canning, because it's usually the wrong time of year and it's hot and sweaty work, and I do enough of that in my garden. Okay, there's some comment from John. I can't really see. Yeah, isn't that a beautiful garden? It no longer exists, unfortunately, because this person moved, but all right. All right, so post-harvest, it really depends. What you do post-harvest really depends on your marketing. So if you are growing primarily for your family or selling at farmers market, we call that direct marketing. Selling to restaurants is kind of in between. If you're schmoozing with the chef or the restaurateur, then that's direct marketing. If you're selling to schools and you go through a wholesaler, then that's like wholesale marketing, duh. So at this point, because I can't see you, and you can't see me, you're just hearing this disembodied voice, we're going to put up a little poll to see who you are. So Linda, if you could put up poll number 1, please. And you all just click on what best fits you. Okay, looks like it's settled down. Mr. White took 4th. Looks like most of you are growing for yourself or family, and then some for farmers market, and then CSA. Oh, Shaun White. Oh! Seriously, okay. I don't want to digress. So you guys are going to have to bear with me, because a lot of this stuff might not pertain to you, but maybe if you're thinking of going to sell to other places and not just feed yourself or your family, you'll find the information useful. So Linda, could you put up poll number 2, please? And this is trying to figure out what commodities or what produce items you guys are interested in. And I'm sorry if your favorite produce item or crop is not listed, but these are the ones I could think of that were most commonly grown by Minnesotans. And it looks like tomatoes are winning. What is this obsession with tomatoes? I grew tomatoes for 2 years for research, and after the end of that, I couldn't stand the smell of tomatoes, and I wouldn't grow tomatoes in my garden for years. Just recently, in the last 2 years, I started growing tomatoes again. Okay, looks like solanaceous crops like tomatoes, peppers, and potatoes are winning over brassica crops like broccoli, cauliflower. $16 for broccoli, $15 for cucumbers. There's no way I'm going to be able to write this down fast enough. Okay. Thank you for filling that out. Oh, some apple growers. Okay. So I'm going to go on to the next slide then. All right. So as I said, direct marketing is stuff like selling to farmers market, and CSA kind of goes in that category, because you're handing over your hard grown product to the person who's going to use it, the last user. Whereas wholesale, you're giving your stuff or selling your stuff to people who are then going to sell it on to other people. So the marketing requirements are really different. So direct, if you're going to the farmer's market once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, if you really like working really hard and have that much product, or you might go when you have product. But wholesale, you have to sign a contract. It's you promise to deliver X amount of whatever on this day, and it has to be X quality. So in direct marketing, the quality can vary, but in wholesale, there are quality standards. And in direct marketing, the kind of packaging you use can vary, but in wholesale, the packaging has to meet certain standards, and the buyer often sets those standards. So, are there any questions on that? Okay. So, as I said, packaging can differ. Obviously, these pictures on the left are from farmers markets, and you got everything from nice baskets to these paper trays, and then people haul it away in plastic bags often. Whereas in wholesale, you have these things that we call clamshells, or the standard are these cardboard boxes. This picture on the far right is kind of the extreme case. It's a specialty pack of tomatoes just for McDonald's. So if you ever wonder why tomatoes in your hamburger at McDonald's doesn't taste very good, this might give you a clue. But what it is the tomatoes, they almost look like they came out of a factory. They're all uniform sizes and shapes, and they're in the specialty pack. They're only packed in 2 layers, and they're all stemmed down. In fact, there are no stems, but they're all stemmed down. Okay, and then the other thing in wholesale now, because food safety is a big concern, is that they want farmers to have some kind of trace back system. And this could be a simple label as shown in this picture. It's a code that the farmer uses to tell what field these peppers came out of and what day they were harvested. So this is a farmer's market display. And I don't know if you can tell, but some of the potatoes are not perfectly round. Some of them look like they're bruised and then scarred over, and they're all different sizes. This is a lovely display, I have to say, because it's my husband's brother's farm. So it would be disloyal of me to say that there's anything wrong with this, but this is a farmer's market. It's a direct market. You can talk to your customers and say, well, potatoes don't all come out of the ground at the same shape, and, yeah, they get bruised, but they heal over, and that's not a disease or anything. Whereas if you sell wholesale, they're just going to get, no good, has to all look the same. So there are standards that are set that wholesalers use, and these standards are published by the Department of Agriculture in their agricultural marketing service. And what it is that they have standards for different things like size. So there are B-size potatoes. The minimum size has to be 1.5 inches, small is 1.75 inches, medium is 2.25 inches, and large is 3 inches. Then there are tolerances for different defects, like, I don't know if you can tell in this picture right by this person's middle finger, the skin has come off the red potato, and so that's called skinning. There are defects, like scarring and bruising, and then dirtiness or cleanliness. And then there are other defects. These are pictures of physiological disorders, not diseases. So, except this might be scab, which is a disease, the picture by itself. The middle picture, in the picture 6, this is hollow heart, which is caused often when there's flooding. This is black spot, which is caused by bruising and stuff like that. So what happens with these standards is not that, oh, you can't have any of them, but it's like if you have USDA grade 1 or fancy or something, you can only have X percent of these defects, and X percent, like 10% are this size, or, you know, you have 5% are skinning, and then for the next quality group, it would be 15% or 20%. So anyway, if you wanted to find these standards, you can find them in on the web, and just look up USDA Ag Marketing Service. Okay, so now I'm going to do like a little quiz, I think. So good post-harvest handling, the goal of good post-harvest handling is to keep your harvest produce quality as long as possible until, and it's, if you're selling stuff, it's until the consumer eats the product, because it's like, if you ever buy stuff at the supermarket, and 80% of Americans get stuff from supermarkets, I don't know if that means that the rest of the 20% only get stuff from farms, or they grow it, or they don't eat, but 80% of Americans get their produce from supermarkets. And if you ever shop in a supermarket and you buy something and you expect it to last for a week and it rots in a day, aren't you disappointed? Well, you know, so if you're selling stuff, your customer acts like that too. So, so it's not until, so good post-harvest handling, you have to think beyond when you let it out of your hands. You have to kind of think beyond that if you're selling, to when your customer is going to use that product within a reasonable amount of time. I mean, if they take it home and they don't use it forever, then they can't come back and go, nah, you sold me bad product. That's really not fair. And I think most consumers understand that. But if there's a reasonable expectation and their expectation is not met, they're not going to be happy. And unhappy customers are not repeat customers. Okay, so the other thing I need to tell you, or I want to tell you, is that quality goes downhill from harvest. As soon as you cut that piece of product off the plant, that's as good as it's ever going to get. So your goal is to keep it as close to that as possible. It's kind of like, I am not going to be any better than I was physically when I was 25. I might be wiser, but physically, you know, I'm just not going to be as flexible. So that's sort of the analogy. Okay, so we're going to put up, Linda is going to put up, because she's doing all the work, the next poll, and just make a guess. I just want to see what, if, you know, I'm really necessary. Okay, I might not be necessary, so you guys can just sit back and pat yourselves on the head and say, wow, good job. Because, okay, so I'll go over this a little bit more and talk about the reasons why temperature is the most important factor, but that's really good. Okay, next question. And if you're not if you're not selling, you could kind of pretend you are, and try to answer this poll. Yeah, maybe some of you already have some of this equipment, so you don't need some of the other equipment. If you do, I'd like to know that. Just to, what's the word I want? Satiate my curiosity. All right, that's interesting. Could we have the next one, please? Next poll, please, Linda. Hey, Nicole, you don't work for Extension, do you? All right. Thank you for that, Extension Office. All right. All right, let's see. I think there's one more questionnaire. And you might not grow all of these commodities, but it's kind of like, well, which ones would you harvest first? If you did have them in your garden or farm. Answers are hopefully going to be forthcoming in the presentation. Let's see. Okay, great. Apples wins, and then carrots, tomatoes, and then leafy greens. All right, so we're done with that fun part. I'll go back to the presentation. Thank you for playing along. Okay, so I'm going to try and cover some food safety stuff. Those of you who are selling to institutions know that your buyers might require you to have a food safety plan, and I think Kathy Zeman's going to cover some of this, maybe in a different presentation, but Michelle Sherman gave me these slides, and so I thought I would be remiss if I didn't cover this a little. The number one thing is, if you are sick and must work, don't handle produce. Go do paperwork instead. Farmers have told me that because food safety is really important to them, they really don't like getting their customers sick. They will pay some of their worker to stay home for the day. And I was really glad to hear that, because I don't like hearing about people getting sick either. The number one thing farmers can do to improve food safety is to wash their hands. It's like doctors and hospitals. The number one thing that healthcare workers can do is wash their hands before they see the next patient. So the number one thing farmers can do, and you can do if you're just growing for your own family, is to make sure you wash your hands, especially after you tend to some of your other bodily functions. So this is a really simple and inexpensive hand washing station that Michelle Sherman, who is our food safety specialist at the University of Minnesota, put together. And she scavenged the plywood for the stand from her friends, including me. And it's just a water jug, and there's a wash tub filled with paper towels, and you have to be single-use paper towels if you're really serious about a food safety plan, and a bucket to catch the drippings, and there's a bottle of soap here, and it's got to be soap, not sanitizer, because the action of scrubbing your hands actually helps remove bacteria. And Michelle was trained as a nurse as well as a horticulturist, and she's like, when I'm with her, I'm very sure to wash my hands for 20 seconds, well, when she's around. Okay. The other thing farmers can do is to build these portable toilet systems in their fields. Providing toilets is often very crucial. This facility was built by an apple grower, and it's you can tow it on a trailer. There's also a hand washing station attached to it. All right, so post-harvest starts from harvest, and then it goes on until you sell it. So here's something you can do when you're harvesting, and it is cull as you harvest. Just leave the bad stuff in the field, till it under, because as I said, the quality is only as good as when you harvest it and it goes downhill. So if it's already bad and you harvest it, I know it hurts sometimes to leave it in the field, but you really want to do that. Unless it's diseased, and then you might want to throw it into some kind of disease compost pile. The other thing you want to do is avoid hurting your product, bruising it. The guy on the left is harvesting leafy greens into a mesh bag. And this works for the farmer, and I'll show you a picture later about why he harvests into a mesh bag, but this is not optimal because the bag is on the ground. And from a food safety point of view, you want your produce to stay off of the ground as much as possible. So the picture on the right is of a woman harvesting something, but she's using this bicycle harvester that was developed by the University of Wisconsin ergonomic group, and it's nice because it saves her from stooping up and down, up and down, up and down, and you all know how hard on your back it is to harvest stuff and work in the farm. So this helps her back a little bit, and also the produce item that she's harvesting goes into the white tub and it's off the ground and it stays clean. All right, so if you're a farmer and you are going to sell your product, or if you don't want your loved ones to get sick, make sure you wash and sanitize your buckets and bins. So, you can kind of use common sense. Some people say they do it once a week, but really, if it gets really soiled, you just don't want to harvest into that bin. Okay, so the next thing is, after you harvest, you want to keep your produce cool. So if you don't have a cooler, you could use something like shade. This is especially, you still want to keep it covered if you put it under a tree, because birds like to roost in trees. This shade is not optimal because it's open to the air, and birdies and mice and stuff, little critters, can still come in and leave little droppings on the produce items. But it's better than nothing. Okay, so this slide, I'm not sure how well you all can see it, but the take-home message is that shade is good. So this is a box of cherries. The air temperature was about 80 degrees after about 3 hours when the box was in the field. But on the top of the box, the temperature was as high as 100 degrees if the box was left unshaded. If the box was shaded, the temperature on the top of the box of the cherries was only 75 degrees. So 75 for cherries is really good unless you want the whole box to be like pie, or you want instant jam. So after you harvest and you shade it, you're going to need to clean your product. The message is to clean your product gently. A lot of people use wet rags to clean tomatoes. This is okay as long as you're not scrubbing really hard. I got a phone call from somebody who's selling cherry tomatoes to a public school, and he said, well, they want us to clean the cherry tomatoes. I said, yeah, that makes sense. You know, little kids tend to put whatever in their mouths, and they're not really careful. So you want to make sure your product is clean. But he said, well, but when I clean it, the skin comes off. I said, well, okay, you don't have to scrub it. You just have to gently wipe it off. The problem is, if you're using a wet cloth, after a while the cloth's going to get dirty, as seen in this slide, and that's not so wonderful from a food safety point of view. So you have to make sure you have a whole selection of rags, clean rags, to use to clean your tomatoes. So somebody asked me, well, can I wash tomatoes with water? And water is a good way to clean stuff. And there's different ways to do it. You can spray it, or if you can dunk it. Now, tomatoes coming from Florida, which is where a lot of commercial tomatoes come from, fresh market tomatoes, are harvested in bulk, and then they're put into a dunk tank of water. There recently was a new salmonella outbreak from Florida tomatoes, and in the past there have been E. coli outbreaks from tomatoes, even though people did the right thing, the consumer did the right thing about cleaning the outside of the tomato, making sure they used a clean knife that never touched any meat or anything, but they still got sick. And the reason is because if the water in the dunk tank is a little cooler than the inside of the tomato, and the calyx, the green part, little hat thing, has been taken off from the tomato. Let me go back. So like in this slide, the calyx has been removed from all the tomatoes, but there's a resulting in the stem scar, and this stem scar has little holes in it. So if they're put in dirty dunk water with any kind of bacteria, and the water is a little cooler than the interior of the tomato, the water gets sucked into the inside of the tomato, and the bacteria gets sucked in as well. So consumer can do everything right, clean it up, and then it reproduces. And then they eat the tomato raw, then they'll get sick. So I would say don't dunk your tomatoes. You might want to spray them. And this picture shows workers at a farm in Wisconsin spraying down some produce item and then packing it. This shows a different farm where they ran a hose from a well out in the field, and they ran the hose into the packing shed. There's a stainless steel mesh counter here for drainage, and that's what they use to wash off their produce. So using water is good because it takes the field heat out of the produce, which is nice because, as most of you know, temperature is the most important factor to control to prolong shelf life. So if you do that, though, you have to make sure your water is clean. Potable is the word people use, like you can drink it, if that's your final rinse. So here is a picture of a man washing leafy greens, and this is great. Commonly done this way. So remember the picture of the guy harvesting leafy greens earlier in this presentation? He was harvesting into these mesh bags, and the reason why they use the mesh bags is because they have a big flatbed truck and filled with tanks of water, and then they just take the mesh bags and dunk it into these tanks of water to get the field heat out, and then they drive the truck back to the packing shed area, and then they'll put it into clean water. The problem is this water gets really dirty really fast, and the public health guys are not too enthusiastic about this method. They claim they haven't gotten anybody sick, but, maybe they want to use smaller troughs, which could be expensive. I mean, I don't know. They already use a ton of water, but we would encourage them, we being the people who don't have to pay for the water, and just dispense free advice on whether they want it or not, to change the water more frequently. Okay, the other thing they could do, and this particular farm doesn't, is to use a sanitizer in the wash water. And the most commonly used sanitizers are chlorine and peroxyacetic acid. Ecolab sells a commercial product called Tsunami, and that basically is peroxyacetic acid. And it's peroxide with acetic acid, which is what's in vinegar. A lot of organic growers don't like using chlorine because the chlorine can interact with organic materials like soil, and you get byproducts, chemical byproducts that are not so wonderful for the environment. Also, some people just don't like using chlorine for personal reasons. So you don't use a whole lot of any of these in your wash water. So I don't know what to recommend, but I do know to recommend just using sanitizer in the wash water. And there are these really cheap test strips that you can use to see whether or not you are using the right amount in your water. And as the water gets dirtier, the effectiveness of the sanitizer decreases, so that's another reason why we really recommend that you change your water quite frequently. All right, so then after you wash your product, you want to dry it. And there's a couple ways people do it. The most common way is to put it, again, on some kind of stainless steel mesh platform. This one's kind of nice, except it's open to the air and birdies. On the right is a picture of mesh bag of greens in a washing machine. And you don't wash it in the washing machine, you just spin dry it in the washing machine. I think the next picture is of a guy putting mesh bags into a washing machine. Those mesh bags look a little dirty, but that is one effective way to do it. Jensen Farms, if you don't know, is a farm that grew cantaloupe. They had a major food safety outbreak, and they got sued left and right. They're settling the suit. They were threatened with jail time. Part of the problem was that the equipment that they used was dirty, and it wasn't really supposed to be used for cantaloupes. And then they also had pools of water around the packing line and that were harboring salmonella or listeria. All right, so there's some products like potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, and garlic, and winter squash that need to go through a curing process after harvest before they're put into storage. And all this does is cure, kind of scab over bruised areas or nicked areas. To do this, you just put the product in a warm temperature, like 75, 80 degrees with some ventilation for a week and a half to 2 weeks, and moderate relative humidity. That's what RH stands for. And then, they just kind of scab over. If you've ever really looked at sweet potatoes, you'll see that they get bruised quite a bit, and they heal themselves. Isn't that nice? Okay, so you harvested, you washed, you dried, you cured. So now the next thing to do if you're selling is to pack stuff. And a lot of farmers take stuff to a packing house. And these are the recommendations or the things you have to check off if you're going to have a food safety audit. Just to know, you want to cover all your light bulbs, or you want to have shatterproof light bulbs, because the food safety people really don't like it if light bulbs break and little pieces fall into your food, or the food that you're going to sell. The reason why you want to seal doors and windows is to keep the little birdies and animals out, which is really difficult, but you want to do it as best you can. You want to keep pallets a foot from the walls, and that's the same reason. You just don't want to get dirt on your produce or little rats and stuff. Same thing with fixing holes. Okay, they want you to remove culled product every day, but that's because they want to, and you have to separate stuff that you don't want from stuff that you do want to sell. And they have to be in, you have to have clearly marked bins that say, okay, this is junk or it's disease and I'm not gonna sell it, I'm gonna compost it. So they really want you to separate it. And that's the same thing about keeping garbage bins covered, is to keep the little vermin out of your food. That's mainly what that is about. So this is another slide about pest control in a packing house. You don't want to have bait in the packing house because you don't want to attract rodents to the packing house. You want to really keep them out. A lot of food safety stuff is about documentation and record keeping, so you want to document trap checking and your policies and stuff. I'm hoping Kathy Zeman's going to cover a lot of this stuff. Okay, so in the packing house, you can design it however you want. The top picture shows a part of a packing house in California. So as I said, 80% of Americans get their produce from supermarkets, and a lot of that produce comes from California. So if you've never been to California and driven around like the Salinas Valley or the San Joaquin Valley and looked at those vegetable fields, I'm here to tell you that you see the corn and soybean fields outside your window, which are covered by snow. Just imagine that being broccoli or iceberg lettuce. In California, there's like thousands of acres of iceberg lettuce, and it's kind of scary to think that people like to eat iceberg lettuce, but they do. It sells, which otherwise they wouldn't be growing it. There is a question, never bait inside? So the answer to that question is no baited mousetraps inside your packing shed. That's correct. Okay, so I'm going to keep going on this because it's already 6:45, and I know you folks all have other things you'd rather do than listen to me rant and rave. If you're building a packing line, one of the things a farmer I've heard recommended is putting your tables and stuff on wheels, because you're always going to be changing your design. You know, maybe you think you want this table here, but, you know, maybe later on you figure it's not going to be the best place, so you move it over. That's one little trick. These are called gravity rollers, and they're really nice because they, you know, the box guys have it down. If you've got a heavy box, why should you carry it around? Make your table do the work for you. The other thing is, to me, backs are really important. You want to avoid stooping as much as possible, so it's nice to have the box that you're packing into elevated so you don't have to go to the box as much. And it's nice to have your product, and if a little elevated so you don't have to stoop to put it into the box. If you have a CSA and your customers come to your farm and pack their own boxes, and there are some CSAs that do that, this is kind of nice to have your product on a shelf like this, and so kind of like in a supermarket, they can They don't have to stoop, and the product is kept off the ground. All right, so there's a plethora of different packaging options, from the cardboard box to these mesh bags, perforated plastic bags. I really like these stacking tubs. The only problem is that they don't have holes for ventilation. And the reason why you want holes for ventilation is because produce is not dead. They still develop, or they're developing in the wrong direction. They're kind of senescing, but they're still developing. They're not dead. And they're using up energy. And in the process of using up energy, they produce gas. Some of the gas, if it builds up around the produce, is really bad. It can cause discoloration. It can cause weird things that look like bruises. It can cause internal browning in apples. Honeycrisp does this. We think it's due to a buildup of gas inside the fruit. So you really want to provide ventilation. And you want to make it easy on your back to move boxes. So everybody probably has one of these dollies. Dollies with that lay flat are nicer because you can put boxes down on them. What is even better, if you can find it on eBay or Craigslist, is a little hand forklift. If anybody knows Chris Blanchard, he's a farmer and a consultant who's down in Iowa, and he uses these for pallets. He builds the pallets himself, but then what happens is you can put your boxes of produce on the pallets, and they stay off the ground, so they're clean. It's good from a food safety point of view, and then you use these pallet movers to move the boxes. Okay, so as you all know, because you're all so smart, temperature management is the most important factor. This slide just shows what happens to sugar and sweet corn at different temperatures. So if you start off at, I don't know why it starts up at, it looks like 0. You lose, and you put your sweet corn at 30 degrees C, which is like close to 90 Fahrenheit. You lose sugar really rapidly within an hour. But if you put it close to freezing, you're not going to lose as much sugar as you did at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And it takes days and days and weeks before you get to that amount of sugar loss. So managing temperature is good, but if it's too hot, you get problems. If it's too cold, you can get problems. So the picture on the right shows beans that were stored under cold conditions. You can see, or maybe you can't, there's supposed to be little brown spots on the beans. That's chilling injury in beans. And oftentimes you don't see the chilling injury yourself in your cooler. You see it after you pull the product out of the cold room. All right, so there are different temperature optima for different products, as you might expect. This is for long-term storage. So this is, if you're going to store it for more than a week. So these products on this list really like things cold and humid. This is a really difficult condition to reach in most people's cold rooms, because if you have chillers, the vents will freeze up because you have to keep it really humid. Okay. So Rosemary and Susan asked, how cold is cold for the beans? And this is the answer. Okay, so if it's less than 40 degrees, beans will get chilling injury. So, and if it's less than 50 degrees, okra and peppers, summer squash and tomatoes will get chilling injury. Now, Rosemary and Susan, I should pay you $5 for asking that question, right? So thank you for asking that question. Okay. So anyway, these items don't like to be as cold And a lot of times, if you're doing short-term storage for like less than a week or so, you can keep your tomatoes and watermelon, peppers and summer squash, eggplants and cucumbers in a nice cool room, and that should be adequate. So farmers who don't have or only have one kind of cold storage, I say try to reach a happy medium and try to go for 40 degrees and as humid as possible, because it's often very hard to get really high humidity. Of course, then there are some products like garlic and onions that don't really like it very humid. And this recommendation is for long-term garlic storage, like if you're an onion storage. So like if you're trying to go for 6 months or more, put your garlic under as cold conditions as possible. If you're harvesting garlic and then you're going to plant it for the fall for next year's crop, don't put it in the cold. Just keep it in your shed or whatever. Okay, so there's a question on suggestions for getting proper humidity. This is really tough. If you've got a small storage room, you can use one of those humidifiers and fill it up a lot. If you don't, I know farmers who just put water down on the floor, which is not a great idea because then it's a hazard. People can slip. The same farmers used to use wet burlap bags and putting it over their product, and that helps. Long time ago, they used to use wet sand and wet burlap bags, but they transitioned out of the wet sand because it was too messy. What do they do for moisture? I don't know. They have a root cellar. They have a very fancy root cellar. And it tends to be fairly humid in the root cellar because it's underground. But yeah, I don't know. It's really tough. Misters really help a lot. And wet burlap bags and stuff like that. Depends on how much product you have. In my cold rooms, I use humidifiers, or actually they leak. The condensers leak, and that provides some humidity. Okay. So there are some things like pumpkins. A lot of people like to grow pumpkins. They like 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 50 to 70% relative humidity. So this is, if people want to know what the optimal conditions are for long-term storage of anything, kiwi fruit, carambola, guava, apples, peaches, cherries, broccoli, cucumbers, I send them to this website. You paid for it with your tax dollars. It's free information. It's www.ba.ars.usda.gov/HB for handbook 66. And the website says draft, but it's not. It's because the guy who put it together had to leave and before taking the word draft off. But really the recommendations, dahlias, delphiniums, larkspur, delphiniums are larkspur. Anything you could think almost horticultural is in this handbook, and it is absolutely free. So that's where you should go for information. All right, if you are handy and you want to build a cold storage room, you don't have to buy a really expensive one. This is one that a CSA farmer built in his garage. He had plywood. He had this nice pink foam insulation, and he built it. And he put an air conditioner in it. And this is what is really handy dandy. This little device above the air conditioner is called a CoolBot. CoolBot for cool robot. That costs about $300. And the thing is, it will pull the temperature in that the air conditioner can, and a lot of people are using it, and it works for the most part. I haven't heard too many complaints, but it is crucial that you put in a thermometer. And you want to put the thermometer where your product is, not by the door of your cold room, because you're opening and closing that cold room, so the thermometer is going to go up and down, and it's not going to be accurate. It's not going to accurately represent what your product is being exposed to. So put your thermometer where you really need it. Seriously, I'm only on slide 43, and it's almost 7 o'clock. So the other thing, a lot of people who sell at market, and you farmer markets people, this is for you. You know that roads can get really hot. This is another tip from Chris Blanchard. Put some insulation on the bottom of your truck to keep that asphalt heat from going into your product. If you're really interested, North Carolina State has plans for this trailer that's turned into a cooler. It also uses the CoolBot and a lot of this pink foam insulation. And you can use it in your field if you don't have a cooler in your packing shed. You can. If you have some kind of generator on it, it's really heavy, but you could attach it to a bike if you have really powerful thighs. But you can use it to transport your product to market as well as, store stuff overnight. All right. You want to only use clean containers and transport. And make sure your containers are only for food and not for your pets or anything like that, your children's pets. Okay, so you can avoid this kind of situation where product is getting smushed and gets kind of dirty. All right, so then you get to market. You want to have some kind of shade. This is my brother-in-law's farm again. It takes them 3 hours to set this up because it's huge. This is in Oregon, but they have the shade mainly because it rains a lot in Oregon, but also it shades the produce and it keeps it cool. All right, so how do you know what to harvest first or last? As I said, after you harvest stuff, it's still developing, it's not dead, and it's using up energy. And some things use energy slower than others, and so they will last longest. And those are the things I think I would recommend you harvest first if you have a lot of things, a lot of different kinds of product to harvest, because you can store them for a long time and they won't go discernibly bad. Whereas other things, most things are moderate respirers or energy users, and you want to harvest them later than you do like apples and garlic and onions. And then some things use up energy really fast, and some growers say that, this list doesn't sync with their experience, but there are different varieties. Your production system is going to differ. Your soil quality is going to be different from the horrible soil I have on campus. So, your experience might be different, and maybe, heck, you're a better post-harvest storer than I am. But this is just kind of a general rule. And so, like, leafy greens don't last as long as apples, for instance. So you might want to harvest those the night before market and put them in a cold place. That's all the recommendation is. All right. So, hey, it's 7 o'clock, and I want to thank you for listening. So I'll hang out here if you have any questions or comments. Oh, good question, Bob. Bob asks, if you're not supposed to have traps, how can you document it? I think that's like if you have some pest control. It's not for the traps, it's for your pest control system or like method. So like if you say, oh, I don't have traps inside my building, but I do have, I'm going to look around once a week to, for evidence of animals or rodents. And that's all you have to do. Like, okay. Document trap checking and control policy. Well, okay, Bob, I'll have to see what Michelle Sherman says about that. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's for traps on the outside of the packing shed. Are there any questions that I can answer? What effect is California's drought for a near-term future? California had a drought in 1977. And people in California got to be really good at conserving water. And it was raining in Northern California. They've had droughts before. I don't know. The weirdo climate changes are bizarre for everybody. I mean, in Minnesota, the last 2 years, we had lots of rain early in the spring and then drought toward the autumn. So I think people can adapt. I mean, what Californian farmers are doing are planting a lot of almonds and they use a lot of drip tape. So farmers, I have to give farmers a lot of credit. They're very adaptable, smart people. Okay. Bob, I'm going to have to send your question to Michelle Sherman, and she can send the answer to Linda and let you all know. Unless somebody else out there listening knows about the traps. Can you briefly discuss? Okay, Dan, I can't read, maybe because my eyes are getting old. Can you briefly discuss what cut harvesting? Is that one cut harvesting? Is that the question?
Can you briefly discuss one?
Like once over harvest?
I believe that is the question. Hello, is my voice being transmitted now?
Okay, Dan, I don't think I answered your question, though, because I don't really understand it. Is it about once over harvesting? Okay, Sheldon, sorry. One cut harvesting? Not sure I know what one-cut harvesting is. Oh, culling while harvesting. Is that what it is? That just means tossing out the bad stuff while you harvest.
Are there other questions? Nicole has one. Is there a link to build my own light harvester?
Nope, I'm still here. Okay, the bike thing is University of Wisconsin. I'm going to have to send that to Linda and she can post it somewhere maybe.
If you send it my way, I will get it posted on the Moodle site in the discussion, and I can also put it right on this week's materials. Cindy, Sheldon provided a little more detail there. He said, my understanding is that multiple cuts during harvesting constitutes processing. We're not hearing you, Cindy. Cindy, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. Thank you, participants, for providing questions and for tuning in. I posted the link to the, thank you, Jane, for the fact sheet there. Take a look at those links. I will also make sure that the links and the information and the questions that were part of the discussion are posted on our classroom page. So if you don't catch it now, look at the classroom page and we'll get it posted there. Thanks all for your attention and for listening. Thank you very much, Cindy, for presenting tonight. And we'll say good night for this week. Next week, we move into the second half of the series. The second half focus on marketing and on food safety and then marketing foods. So this is kind of the transition from production into marketing. Thanks, everyone. Good night.